Good day everyone, I'm Azel T. Madera from BSET English 3B and I will be discussing different approaches to language testing. Before we get started, here are some reminders for everyone. First is to watch and listen attentively. Second is to stay focused, avoid distraction during the discussion. And lastly is to take down notes of the important details. Objectives. At the end of the discussion, students should be able to identify and differentiate the different approaches to language testing and know the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches to language testing. So to start the discussion, let us define first what is language testing. According to Priscilla Allen, language testing is the practice and study of evaluating the proficiency of an individual using a particular language effectively. Language testing plays an important role in the teaching and learning process because it helps language teachers to place their students at their appropriate levels and to diagnose the students' strengths and weaknesses and also to evaluate their performance during and at the end of the course. Moving on, we have the approach. According to Edward Anthony, approach is a set of correlative assumptions dealing with the nature of language and the nature of teaching and learning. An approach is a way of looking at teaching and learning. Underlying any language teaching, approach is a theoretical view of what language is and how it can be learned. An approach gives rise to methods, the way teaching something which use classroom activities or techniques to help the learners. Since we already know the definition of language testing and approach, let us proceed to the four main approaches to language testing, which are the essay translation approach, the structuralist approach, the integrative approach, and lastly is the communicative approach. A useful test will generally incorporate features of several of these approaches. Indeed, a test may inherit weaknesses simply because it is limited to one approach. However, attractive that approach may appear. The essay translation approach. This approach is commonly referred to as the pre-scientific stage of language testing. When we say pre-scientific, it means that it was the time before the development and application of scientific method. No special skill or expertise in testing is required because the judgment of the teacher is considered to be of paramount importance. Tests usually consist of essay writing, translation, and grammatical analysis, often in the form of comments about the language being learned. Tests have a literary and cultural bias, such as linguistic interpretation, ethical concept of what right is and wrong, intentional or unintentional ethnic or racial bias, and religious belief or understanding. Public examination resulting from the test using this approach sometimes have an oral component at the upper, immediate, and advanced level. Moving on to its strengths, this approach is easy to follow because teachers will simply use their subjective judgment. The essay translation approach may be used for testing any level of examinee, and also the model of tester can easily be modified based on the essential of the test. The weaknesses of essay translation approach is that subjective judgment of the teacher tends to be biased, and as mentioned, the tests have a heavy literary and cultural bias. The structuralist approach. This approach views that the language learning is chiefly concerned with the systematic acquisition of a set of habits. The structuralist approach involves structural linguistics, which stresses the importance of constructive analysis and the need to identify and measure the learner's mastery of separate elements of target language, such as phonology, vocabulary, and grammar. And also, testing the skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing is separate from another as much as possible because it is considered essential to test one thing at a time. The structuralist approach uses psychometric approach to measurement with its emphasis on reliability and objectivity forms an integral part of structuralist testing. The psychometric approach to studying intelligence involves obtaining scores from many people on a variety of tests. Moving on to its strengths, in testing students' capability, this approach may objectively and surely be used by tester. Many forms of tests can be covered in the test in a short time. Using this approach in testing will help students find their strengths and weaknesses in every skill they study. The weaknesses of structuralist approach is that it tends to be a complicated job for teachers to prepare questionnaires using this approach. This approach also considered measuring non-integrated skill more than integrated skill. The integrative approach. This approach involves the testing of language in context and is thus concerned primarily with meaning and the total communicative effect of discourse. Consequently, integrative test does not seek to separate language skills into neat division in order to improve test reliability. Instead, they are often designed to assess the learner's ability to use two or more skills simultaneously. Integrative tests are concerned with a global view of proficiency, an underlying language competence or grammar of expectancy, which it is argued that every learner possesses regardless of the purpose for which the language is being learned. Integrative testing involves functional language but not the use of functional language. Also, the use of cloze tests, dictation, oral interview, translation, and essay writing are included in many integrative tests. The strengths of integrative approach. The approach to meaning and the total communicative effect of discourse will be very useful for students in testing. This approach can view students' proficiency with a global view. And also, a model cloze test used in this approach measures the reader's ability to decode, interrupt, or mutilate message by making the most acceptable substitution from all the contextual clues available. And lastly, dictation. Another type using this approach was regarded solely as a means of measuring students' skills of listening comprehension. Moving on to its weaknesses, even if many think that measuring integrated skill is better, sometimes there is a need to consider the importance of measuring skills based on students' needs, such as writing only, speaking only, and etc. The communicative approach. Communicative tests are concerned primarily with how language is used in communication. Language use is often emphasized to the exclusion of language usage. The attempt to measure different language skills in communicative tests is based on a view of language referred to as a divisibility hypothesis. The test content should totally be relevant for a group of examinees and the task set should be related to real-life situation. Communicative testing introduces the concept of qualitative modes of assessment in preference to quantitative modes of assessment. Moving on to its strengths, communicative tests can measure all integrated skills of the students. The testing using this approach faces students in real-life situation, so it will be very useful for them. Because a communicative test can measure all language skills, it can help students in getting the score. Consider students who have a poor ability in using spoken language but may score quite highly on tests of reading. Detailed statements of each performance level serve to increase the reliability of the scoring by enabling the examiner to make decisions according to carefully drawn up and well-established criteria. Some weaknesses of communicative approach is, unlike the structuralist approach, this approach does not emphasize learning structural grammar. Yet it may be difficult to achieve communicative competence without a considerable mastery of the grammar of a language. And also, it is possible for cultural bias to affect the reliability of the test. The planning and design of a test depend on its purpose and the content of knowledge that is being evaluated. The purpose of testing is to provide motivation through timely and accurate feedback and keep the learners challenged and interested in improvement. Testing is designed to motivate learning experiences, but not cause anxieties and low self-esteem for the learners. This is why designing a test, a teacher is approach this process professionally and carefully. And that's all for today. I hope you've learned something. Thank you for listening. Bye!